Welcome to the session. In the back, if you can hear me, raise your hands. All right, thank you. This is working? Okay. It's probably one of the bigger numbers of people I've seen in a room around data, first thing in the morning. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. I think it'll be a very lively discussion. I'm Andrea Venezia. I'm Executive Director of the Education Insight Center at Sac State, and I'm faculty in public policy and administration there. I will say this is being recorded, and so we want to make sure that any question, not any comment, but any question that you have is on the mic. So we have a mic up here, and we'll figure out logistically how we're going to do this. But we might repeat back your question to make sure it's recorded, and everyone here will make sure to speak into their mics. So we're really looking forward to talking today about how people are putting together data systems, information to be able to learn what we need to learn about student learning, engagement, progression, and success in different systems, and to talk about the different purposes that exist to do this at the state and the regional and local levels. So that we all know who we're talking with in a big space like this. Let's get a high-level sense of who you are. I know these aren't mutually exclusive categories, so just raise your hand for whatever resonates. So state policy people. Hi, with pride. State policy people. All right. Research. All right. Advocacy. All right. K-12. Higher ed. All right. Not representing as much. Other. Did I miss a big category? Funders. Funders? Okay. All right. Well, welcome again, and thank you. And so you know who we are in the order of presentations. Evan White, who's Executive Director of the California Policy Lab, a collaboration between UCLA and UC Berkeley. Simon Kim, Associate Vice President of Research and Sponsored Programs at California State University, Long Beach. Marcy Locke, founder and co-director of the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust and senior director of data governance strategies at the Santa Clara County Office of Education, and Noah Bookman, executive director of the Core Data Collaborative. So as you can tell from their titles and affiliations, they have very different lenses on issues related to data collection and use. And that's what we're going to dive into today. All of the efforts share a common focus on supporting equitable opportunities and equitable outcomes for students. So a little bit of framing about this session. The learning goals, which everyone has been asked to speak to, are 1, the benefits that linking data across systems can bring with examples from practice. 2, lessons learned from people who have built cross-system data systems, advice to people who are building systems, and guidance on how to share data with people at different levels. So on the guidance and advice issue, it's a perfect moment to come together about collecting and using education data in California, given the governor's proposed budget, the $10 million, to plan and put together a data system. And we all know that California has been lagging, and we don't like our comparisons with other states, but the truth is, there are different ways to measure and understand what kind of data system counts as a state longitudinal data system. At Insights, we use the Education Commission of the States report from 2016 that said that 37 states, not us, have a statewide longitudinal data system that links records for at least 2 of the 4 core state agencies in education defined as early learning, K-12, post-secondary, and workforce. And 16 states have a full P20, preschool into the workforce, statewide data system. So it's a good time, too, to get more specific about the purposes of data systems and to understand different analytical needs that we have in education at different levels. So from a statewide longitudinal data system perspective, those tend to be really big questions that we have about how our systems are serving our students, and if we're meeting state goals, were we to have state goals in education. So what happens to students who drop out of high school? What happens to students who drop out of post-secondary? What happens to students who go to multiple public post-secondary institutions? How many high school graduates meet eligibility requirements for admission to the CSU and UC but don't go? And how do we understand those issues when you break it down by race, ethnicity, gender, geographic location, and other issues to get at the equity imperatives for our state? So those tend to be the big types of questions that we think out for a state-level system. In terms of local and regional needs and purposes, and our panelists will get at this in more detail, they tend to be different. So you can examine issues like course taking in real time and support student decision-making about the paths that they take. And you can get a better understanding, a fine-grained understanding around knowledge and skills development, socio-emotional growth, and those types of issues, and provide that kind of formative information to be able to deploy interventions effectively. So the purposes and needs should drive the architecture and development of data systems. And there are very big cost and capacity and time implications when it comes to developing these systems and the frequency of uploads and technical issues like that. But dealing with this work is not just technical, it's very political and relational. And even if the purpose is framed around continuous learning and improvement, the stakes are very high for the different educational entities involved, and it takes a lot of trust to do this work at the different levels. And so everyone here comes from a place that we must move beyond compliance with how we're using data and toward a richer understanding of how we serve our students, what our students need in order to have a solid foundation so that they can have productive and happy lives, and to understand who's being systematically left out of opportunities. So with that, I want to make sure you know the structure of the day, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists. So each person will have 10 minutes. I'll be giving a 2-minute warning. Then we'll have time for Q&A with all of you. And then you'll have table discussions. We'll have a prompt for table discussions. And if time permits, I'll randomly select some tables to report back on the one big thing you talked about. So be prepared for that if there's time. And with that, I will turn it over to Evan.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everybody. All right. Data in the morning. It's like coffee, but better. So I'm going to sort of set the stage and talk about a report that some of the faculty affiliates at the California Policy Lab put out as part of the Getting Down to Facts report. This report was written by Jesse Rothstein, Meredith Phillips, Sarah Reber, at UCLA and UC Berkeley. I'm not any one of those individuals. And I'm also not, as much as my esteemed panelists here, an expert in education so much as I am in cross-sector data systems. So just to sort of tee that up at the beginning, as Andrea was saying, we have an issue here in California, especially as compared to other states, that we don't often have the information that we need to answer some key questions about the educational data system, about education in California. I'm sure I don't need to tell that to this room, and you've probably seen a number of reports, including the one that we put out as part of Getting Down to Facts, that dives deeply into this, right? So what we said, sort of the main thing we said as part of that report was that there's a patchwork of data systems, not well integrated, and that more importantly, we can't answer the state's most important policy questions in this area. Andrea's team at Ed Insights put out a similar report that talked about this. PPIC put out a similar report. And as you can see on the right, not only are we one of only 13 states that don't have a SLDS, we're one of only 6 states that don't do any combining of data between the higher education system and either workforce or K-12 on a systematic basis. So Andrea already mentioned some of the questions that we're unable to answer, but they're actually pretty basic, right? So how can teachers and schools customize instruction for specific students? What happens to students that move between schools, between districts, or drop out altogether, and why? Which high schoolers are prepared for college or for their careers? And what higher ed factors lead to success in the workforce? These are truly basic questions about our education system that we can't answer with the current data systems that we have in California. The current system is fragmented. I'm sure most of this room sort of understands this, but this is a not very well-designed description of all the data systems in California. On the left, there's a number of education-related data systems, a patchwork in early childhood. At CDE, the Department of Education, they roll up a lot of information from schools and districts into the CalPAD system. In the higher ed systems, they roll up from the campuses, but don't do a very good job of combining data across those systems. And then there are other systems at the Student Aid Commission, the National Student Clearinghouse, the Student Loan Data System, that have some connections to those entities, but not a whole lot. In fact, if I can, this is my rudimentary way of trying to describe what exists thus far. And some of those lines should be dotted because they are not enabled for all purposes, just for certain particular purposes. I should say that there are other entities that have made much better maps than this. On the non-education side, there's a number of other data systems that might tell us something about both important factors in education and important things that are changing educational outcomes. So perhaps most importantly, on the workforce side, in terms of labor and employment outcomes, you have the Employment Development Department, which keeps quarterly earnings, which would be helpful in knowing whether or not we're preparing people for successful careers. The Franchise Tax Board, which has annual income data as well as a wealth of other information. And then a number of other systems, health and human services, criminal justice, homelessness systems. I won't go into all of them, but suffice it to say that if you're interested in doing work on the school-to-prison pipeline, for example, if you don't have a good connection between, let's say K-12 data systems and the DOJ's information on arrests and convictions, you're really not going to be able to learn whether or not sort of disciplinary practices in schools are really causing later criminal justice involvement, or even being able to sort of understand what factors might lead to later criminal justice involvement. So how could a linked longitudinal data system help? We go into this in some depth in our report. These are just a few ways, right? Identifying best practices. Maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a school, maybe it's a particular policy at a campus. Trying to understand the longitudinal impacts of that policy, so over time, whether or not it has an impact on people's educational outcomes or their career outcomes. Evaluating policy and program changes, continuous improvement efforts. Right now, and I think Noah will probably talk about this some more, some of the larger urban districts actually have done a good job of collaborating to connect together their data in a way that smaller, less resource districts really haven't. And so having a statewide database can in some ways improve equity and access for some of the smaller districts or smaller colleges around the state. More timely supports to students, especially mobile students, as Andrea mentioned, people who are transferring between schools or districts or campuses. Right now, we really don't know a lot about students who are moving between the community college system and the other higher education systems, even though transfer is one of the main outcomes that you would hope to understand. In those systems, we really don't know what's happening to transfer students after they transfer. So these are just a few. I wanted to touch on the last one here. There's a lot of great efforts that are happening at the regional level, and I don't think it makes sense to try and duplicate that with the state system. But there have been some efforts, either for a one-off project or regionally, that really are recreating the wheel in ways that a statewide data system would alleviate. So I think that that's one of the benefits of setting this up. As Andrea mentioned, many states are well ahead of us, and I don't want to belabor this point. We like to think of ourselves as the best. Here in California, we are the biggest and the most prosperous. We should have an excellent data system. We're the home of Silicon Valley, right? Like we should have figured this out. But the point here, I think, is that a lot of the challenges that people throw up when they're talking about creating these linked data systems have been met, have been figured out, have been dealt with in many, 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 many other contexts. Okay, so this is not something that is so impossible that we can't figure out. There are some bright spots in California. Some of them are here represented on the panel. I'm not going to dive into depth on each of these, but I don't mean to say it's all doom and gloom. We're doing a good job in a lot of various areas, and I think what we really need to do is build incrementally on the things that we've already established and try and do a better job of connecting together those systems that we already have. So we were all very heartened to see the proposal in the governor's budget. There was a couple things I found interesting about this. One is that in many states around the country, sort of P20, meaning preschool through post-higher ed and workforce, the proposal didn't stop there. It also included health and human services, which I was heartened to see. I think that's probably because there's been a real effort within the Health and Human Services Department to connect together their own data. There's about 16, I think, departments within that agency, and that includes information about foster care, Medicaid, social service, food stamps, all sorts of helpful information that you think would really deliver insights for educators and for people trying to understand education. So I was heartened to see that inclusion. I should mention right before, 2 minutes? Okay, great. Right before I came up here, just 20 minutes ago, I got a call from someone at the governor's office who wanted me to let everyone in this room know that he wishes he could be here, a guy by the name of Ben Cheetah. And he's been sort of tasked with trying to set up this state longitudinal data system. And he wanted to be here and wanted to make sure everyone should know in this room that if they want to reach out to him to talk about the setup of the state longitudinal data system, they should reach out to him. And he even told me to give his email address, ben.cheetah@gov.ca.gov. So I know Ben, CHIDA, yeah. Not like the cat. That would be great, though. Anyways, it's great to see, and there are other folks in the governor's office who are also working on this. It's great to see the commitment they have to this. I think this is not just a budget proposal. It seems to me like this is something that's really going to happen, that they're going to dedicate a lot of time to. So that's ben.chida. Maybe he'll regret calling me. At gov.ca.gov. I think there's a lot of open questions, and hopefully we'll maybe get to talking about some of them later in the panel, about design and implementation of the system. So I put a couple of them up here in terms of where it would live, how frequently it would be updated, what data would be included, and what types of governance would be involved. Lots of open questions. I think they are not necessarily easy questions, but they are also totally solvable questions that many other states have solved. What barriers remain? I've listed a few here, and Andrew's already mentioned a few as well. Linking data across some of these systems is not always as straightforward as we'd like. In K-12, for example, we don't have Social Security numbers. And so there's some sort of fuzzy matching that might need to be done, which isn't always appropriate for particular uses of the data. It might be more appropriate for others. Ensuring data quality, political risk, right? Measuring things always brings risks, surprises. And what I'd really like to see, and what we said in our report is, we would really like to see the conversation shift away from the accountability framework into all of the other purposes that we can use this data for. And so I think leading with the purposes to which we'll put the data will really sort of help to orient the conversation. There are, of course, privacy concerns. I think they're incredibly important, and they're very much, we're capable of overcoming them. And then I'll stop there, since I'm getting the signal from Andrea, and hope to join the conversation later. Thanks so much.
Good morning. Let me try to figure this out first. Oh, thank you. Okay. Let me just make a quick comment about what Evan said. I think it's great that we're developing a system-wide, or hoping to develop a statewide longitudinal database. But I think more than that, it's important for us to start thinking about what it is that we're going to do with the longitudinal database that we develop. Otherwise, it becomes a database that we put in a lot of time and effort in developing, but no one uses it. I participated in many surveys, and I'm sure all of you have done that as well. And you sometimes wonder exactly who's using those data and in what ways are they using those data. So I think it's important that we start thinking about those things. When I started in higher ed about 25 years ago, I told people that I will retire once we have a system-wide database such as what we're talking about here. So I'm very optimistic that we're having this conversation. But at the same time, I'm not sure whether I'm going to retire anytime soon. Last semester, or last fall, I got a call from a school board in Long Beach area. And they asked me to come in and talk about how their students are doing at California State University, Long Beach. So I went in and I talked about admission, I talked about retention, graduation, college readiness, equity, the gaps, and so forth. and I presented the trend data, and trend data was definitely a positive trend. So in terms of retention and graduation, the retention and graduation rates were going up, and equity gap was closing. So I said, yes, these are great data, and everyone's gonna be very happy about listening to my presentation. And they were. Students in Long Beach were doing quite well compared to other students that we accept. But one question came up, and that question was, to what do you attribute your success in terms of student retention and improving student retention and graduation? And I thought about it, and I said, everything. In other words, I had no idea. I talked about it's because you guys did such a fantastic job preparing these students, so of course they do better. And we're providing all kinds of support services on our campus, so of course they're doing better. In other words, I was throwing pretty much anything and everything that I could think of. But I had no idea why these students were succeeding, because I didn't have any K-12 data. So this past, about 3 years ago, we received a grant from the James Irvine Foundation. And one of the key areas that we focus on was creating this data warehouse, where we collect data from Long Beach Unified, Long Beach City College, and Cal State Long Beach. Not collect, because they're all already collected and they were sitting in their databases. But we had to bring all of those databases together to create a separate one. So this morning, however, time that I have left, I'm going to talk about what it is that we're trying to do, and what are some steps that we're taking, and where we're going from here. So basically, we're trying to create this database so that we can track students to make data-driven decisions to support Long Beach students, either at K-12, community college, or Cal State Long Beach. So it's not so much of how well do they do, but what are some support services that we can provide so that they can be successful at Long Beach Unified, Long Beach City College, as well as at Cal State Long Beach. And we want to understand the time to degree trends for Long Beach students. As much as we want to keep them at Cal State Long Beach, we want them to graduate as well. So we wanted to look at how well they do in terms of graduating at Long Beach State. And we wanted to use the data to support academic advising efforts that we have on our campus, and also understanding academic patterns and outcomes for specific student populations. In other words, those equity gaps that we're talking about. This is a timeline. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but the reason that I'm showing you the timeline is that this has been a 3-year or 2-year project, and we're still working on it. We met with CalPass Plus folks about 2 years ago to talk about exactly what it is that they can offer, and we visited Fresno State because they have a data warehouse using CalPass. And we wanted to look at whether that was applicable in Long Beach. And we invited our colleagues from Long Beach Unified, Long Beach City College to come with us, because it's not just Cal State Long Beach project, but it was a project for all 3 institutions. And the following fall, we revised our MOU. For those of you who are familiar with Long Beach, there is a Long Beach College Promise, and all CEOs signed the MOU. And we had to revise our MOU to include student-specific data as part of the MOU, or sharing student data. So we did that. And then we brought in our general counsel to make sure that it is acceptable. And we brought in our the FERPA officer to make sure that we're not violating anything. And then we started getting data from the other 2 institutions. And I'm going to talk about some of the issues, but one of the issues that we had to overcome was that every institution had a firewall, And so it wasn't as easy as just sending the data file to us. In one case, we actually had to get a flash drive with a whole bunch of data, and it was hand delivered to us, and we had to upload it. And I said, this is 21st century. Do we really have to do that? And they said, there is no other way. So now I think we're fixing that issue, but currently that's one of the issues that we had to deal with. Another issue was that every institution had different way of coding their data. So we had to make sure that what we use on our campus is similar to what LBCC uses and LBUSD uses. So that took us some time. And the biggest challenge was, of course, matching students. As Evan said, K-12, as well as Long Beach City, as well as Cal State, we don't use the social security numbers anymore. So we had to use students' first name, last name, date of birth, and we got about 95% match, given that we're only talking about one very small region in California. Well, it's not exactly small. Long Beach is pretty big, but nonetheless, it's one school district, one community college, one CSU, so it was a little bit easier for us. Now, Andrea tells me I have 2 minutes, so. So we match using first name, last name, and the date of birth, and we matched 12,000 Long Beach Unified students, not Long Beach City College students, with Cal State data. Obviously, I know it's hard to see. We went all the way back to like 19-something. Those students have graduated from us, and it's almost impossible to match those. But this is 19, so 2018, 2017, 2016, we're fairly good in matching those students. And we had to build an infrastructure, but I'm not going to get into all the details because I think you're getting a copy of this PowerPoint. What are some lessons that we've learned? It takes time to align data elements. It's not as simple as, okay, here's the data from Unified School, here's the data from City College, now we're just gonna combine them. That's not how it works. We need to make sure that students are matched and make sure that all the variables are somewhat similar amongst three institutions. So where do we go from here? We're in our infant stage. In other words, we're just merging these data files and we're just matching students. So we're hoping that we can come up with a prediction model of some sort. It's important that we talk about number of students who come to Cal State Long Beach from Unified School District and City College, but we want to know exactly how well they do at Cal State Long Beach and what are some attributes that contribute to their success. So those questions are difficult to answer unless you have K-16 data. So that's what we're looking at. Once the data set, or once the data warehouse is built, we're hoping to analyze those data sets so that we can inform educational practice in K-12 as well as community college. So a lot of analysis that we're going to do, we're going to feed it back to the Unified School District as well as community college. I will stop there. Phew.
I'm actually going to have my timer with me so I can stay on track. I'm Marcy Locke. I'm the Director of Data Governance at the Santa Clara County Office of Education and also one of the founders and co-directors of the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. Simon was saying he was going to stick with this, and have it built so he could retire. I retired in 2012, and I have failed retirement, clearly, because I am deeply engaged in this work and just believe that, if we have the right people at the right table at the right time, we can really do this work. So I wanted to start with a couple things from this morning's keynote. To me, this is all about equity, and it's equity at scale. It's equity across sizes of districts. It's equity across student populations. It's about how we embrace our communities and provide equitable opportunities for all children and families. Our keynote talked about 4 things that were really important to me, this is what a data system has to do. It has to be coherent. It has to honor the local context. It has to build the capacity for support providers and enable us to practice continuous improvement. So the 4 data initiatives that I'm going to talk briefly about this morning that we're leading at the Santa Clara County Office of Education address all of these things. And it's really about providing a seamless system of support. And these 4 data initiatives are the things that we're working on to connect the cross-agency, cross-county data sharing through the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust, the data zone, which is our dashboard, our data warehouse, the dashboards data back to our school districts. We're looking at cross-district data sharing within the data zone work. We have a foster vision application that brings data in from juvenile probation, Department of Family and Child Services, and our school districts to really look at how we provide better and more coordinated support to our kids that are foster youth or justice-involved children. And we're also tackling the what I call crossing the Great Divide, bringing K-12 and pre-K data together so that we can understand the impact of the investments we make in those early learning years to later outcomes in K-12. We want to know what do the developmental screenings and health screenings of early learners, how do they impact an on-time, readiness for kindergartners, and what outcomes do they support as we move down the educational pipeline. So I did retire in 2012. I had been in San Jose Unified for about 20 years and had built one of the first K-12 data warehouses in the country. We stood that up in 2001. And we used that data to great effect. We closed the gap between our Latinx and our white students by 36%. The biggest challenge for me personally, though, and I think for the district as a whole, was that we had many kids who were involved in other systems, and we were not allowed to know what was happening to them. We couldn't coordinate services to provide the opportunity for the safety nets that kids needed. And the reality is that in education, we have the universe of kids. Juvenile probation, social services can have small slices of the kids, but the universe of kids comes into our school districts. And so having education become part of this conversation was really, really critical when we talk about cross-agency, cross-county sharing. So I had an opportunity in 2012 to team with a cross-disciplinary team of researchers from UC Santa Cruz, cross-disciplinary team of practitioners from K-12, and we put in responded to a call that the National Science Foundation had put out on building the community's capacity for data-intensive research in education. And that was the beginning of the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. So our vision, we are currently a partnership of the 3 counties of San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz. And both the county offices of education and the Health and Human Services and juvenile probation agencies. And our research partner has been the University of California at Santa Cruz. Our mission is to change the culture and practice of how data is ethically and responsibly used to develop actionable solutions to critical educational, health, and social problems. So we're providing a secure data environment that will enable all of our stakeholders to share data to coordinate case management. For us, it was critical that this be at the case management level, not at an administrative level. We wanted it down in the hands of teachers and case managers for the various agencies that serve our students. We want to be able to personalize and integrate services to inform public policy and to partner with the university to conduct research in partnership with all of the stakeholders in the trust. So the heart of any of this work, and I think all of us on the panel will, have spoken to this. The heart of this work is trust. And for us, it was building a trust framework to establish and maintain data security, data privacy, and confidentiality, and to ensure that our technical architecture, our legal architecture, and our governance architecture all pivot around that whole concept of trust. And we say that the last word in our title, trust, Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust, is really the most important of the work that we do. So our goal is really to connect trusted data environments using all of these policy, legal, and technical components. I think one of the things that has made this effort really unique in our experience, first of all, is the secure data environment. We follow all of the general data protection regulations that were established first by the European Union and now have been enacted internationally, certainly in the United States and especially in the Silicon Valley. So that framework assures data protection, privacy, and security. We have been working with the legal counsels from all 3 counties to develop a multi-agency agreement. The core of that agreement are our values that this effort will do no harm to children, that we are very focused on equity, on making sure that kids are not being profiled as a result of sharing this data, but it is about having the right data so that we can work together to improve outcomes for kids. Finally, education data is at the core. When you have conversations taking place in other jurisdictions, education is rarely represented at the table because education is such a highly federated system. I think Simon talked about it, so did I think we're just at that point where every district's on a different student information system. Even if they're on the same system, they customize it. You don't have common standards that are working across those systems. So for us, putting the Santa Clara County Office's data zone at the heart of this effort allows us to conform and standardize that data. So we have an incredibly rich repository of data from we have districts, as small as 100 students to districts that have 30,000 students. The smaller districts never get to be part of these conversations because they don't have the resources to do it. And our goal has been to level that playing field. So we converged visions with the Santa Clara County Office of Education and the University of Santa Cruz at University of California at Santa Cruz in 2015 with a memorandum of understanding, joining all of our efforts to move this to move the needle forward in this data sharing work. And in 2018, the Regional Data Trust became an official initiative of the county office, and we were established as a research center at University of California at Santa Cruz. So a little bit about our second initiative, which is also core to the Regional Trust, is our Data Zone Data Warehouse. So we're offering low-cost data warehousing with secure district partitions and role-based authentication for our districts. We provide very actionable dashboards for decision-making that support local district priorities. We are helping districts aggregate multiple data sources. And in the process, we improve the data quality. Anytime you've got a system like a student information system with lots of people entering data, it gets pretty dirty quickly. So when you start bringing it into a data warehouse and you're dashboarding it back to people, it's like, oh, we have things that we need to clean up in this data. And so it's a really important conversation because by the time the data comes into the warehouse, it has been standardized and conformed, and it makes it an excellent repository for how we might consider conducting research that can link across all of the systems. We have 90 dashboards, over 450 metrics. Those update nightly. They are highly interactive. You click on any metric and it drills to a list of the kids. You can create a cohort around those students. We have districts that are achieving phenomenal results by focusing on the data as the first point in their conversation around the equity issues that they may face. We're developing metrics that align to the California dashboard as well. So we're really very closely connected to the Department of Education in our efforts to make sure that we're coherent across all the systems. Our Foster Vision application brings data from juvenile probation, Department of Family and Child Services, and school districts together every night. So that it can be used by the caseworkers to coordinate their efforts with one another. and to ensure the most seamless system of support for kids who are maybe foster youth or justice involved, or both. We have 27 Santa Clara County districts in foster vision. Actually, I think as of last week, we now have 29. So we just kind of have 2 more to go. Some of it's a capacity issue. We just don't have, we need more staff to be able to do this work, because it is heavy lifting. And the last thing that I'm really, I'm excited about all of it, as you can tell, but the thing that I'm really excited about right now is that we have successfully linked data from early learning providers to K-12. We are working to get SSIDs, the statewide student identifiers, for our 0 to 5 population. We've got a tremendous energy and effort around doing this. And we're pretty excited because we've identified now, we have a population of about 80, almost 90,000 0 to 5-year-olds in our county that we will be able to work with the Department of Ed to assign SSIDs so that we can begin linking developmental assessments, health screening information that can travel with those kiddos when they move into the K-12 system. So just to wrap up where we are today, we have an assembly resolution that was passed in support of the Regional Data Trust. Assemblymember Mike Stone has been really helpful in carrying this forward for us. We had AB 597 was signed into law by Governor Brown last November in 2017, and that permits us to be kind of the statewide pilot for sharing data across counties. That has not been in the welfare code before, so we're really excited about that possibility. We've been partnered with the California Health and Human Services Department in a national interoperability collaborative, so we work very closely with Secretary Mike Wilgening and his team. We have 7 working groups in the trust with over 200 participants. We're finalizing all the legal agreements, and I'm over time. So that the Alpha environment is operational, and I've got some of our San Mateo partners here. Janae Luttrell is the Assistant Superintendent for the San Mateo County office, and we're pretty stoked because in March we're standing up the Alpha environment for the San Mateo County Regional Data Trust. So we have 45 districts in the data zone right now across a lot of different counties, 6 counties in California, and we have a current student enrollment of 320,000 records, 320,000 student records who come into the data zone every night. So thank you.
Well, good morning. It's fantastic to be the cleanup hitter here in the presentations. My name is Noah Bookman. I'm the Executive Director of the Core Data Collaborative. I work for an organization called the Core Districts. The Core Data Collaborative it serves about 1/3 of the students in California. We are working with over 80 districts, and actually we're on pace to next year to have over half of the districts and students in the state of California in our system. I think that one of the points that I want to emphasize as I listen to my colleagues is about this idea of design and use cases. That's a very technical term, this use case thing. Design, I think, is at the heart of doing really good work with data, and it often is like the last thing we think about is data types. So the first thing we often think about as data types is like, how are we going to get the data? How are we going to crunch it? How are we going to create the results? But the design part of thinking about like, who is my user? How do I want them to experience this? What conclusions do I hope they reach? Is the thing that we often under-resource and under-spend time on. And it's actually a lesson we've learned at Core Districts in our work with data. Rick and I were talking just before I was about to get up here, and we were very clear initially with what the purpose of working with data in Core was going to be, which is our superintendents and districts had this vision that school quality was about more than just student achievement, that it had to do with the whole child, and that we ought to look at data not just in terms of status, but also in terms of the impact that the schools are having on kids. And the use cases that we had in mind were things like, how does a school district understand where its strengths and challenges are? How does a school understand that when they're doing their budgeting, when they're doing their back-to-school school planning? And so we designed our system around that. We were actually clear at first, our design was not for teachers in a classroom figuring out whether or not the lesson they taught worked. There are other systems that do that. And I think as the state goes down this path of what is our system going to be, to Evan's point, like what is the use case? Like what are we designing this thing for? And so again, we designed to help folks in the state of California and our districts try to have a more holistic picture of how their kids are doing. And so we developed a set of measures, and we were the first in the state to really push out a multiple measure kind of approach to understanding school quality. And so we today both include all the state measures in our approach, but we also have some of cores. It's almost cute to call it locally designed, but because we're like a third of the state now. But locally driven measures, things like academic growth and looking at kids' social emotional skills and looking at the culture and climate of a school. And one of the things I want to emphasize today, because this does get to the question of design and purpose, is that our schools, our districts, they want to be able to answer the question, is what we're doing working? Are we having an impact on students? And the only way you can look at that question is to look at this idea of student growth, which is different than looking at this issue of change. So I think in California now we're all focused on this issue of like, how much did I change year over year in English language arts or graduation? And the problem with that is that a lot can happen to change your results around change that has nothing to do with what you did as a school. So it could be that the kids have come in higher or lower. And so our districts together as a collaborative, and we are a collaborative and we're driven by our district members guiding us in terms of what they want and what they want to see, have really focused on this issue of growth. How have I done it moving last year's fourth grade to this year's fifth graders? Not how did last year's fourth graders compare to this year's fourth graders? And that's really important because growth helps us answer questions about where are we having the greatest impact on student learning? Where is our impact not where we'd like it to be? And that is really going to direct us around issues of, if you're thinking, I just got identified as a targeted intervention school, maybe actually some places in my school, we're actually having a high impact on student learning, and I don't want to mess with that. So you want to be careful about how you look at your data to answer these critical questions. And so, for instance, we see that among schools that had the same kind of modest change year over year, if you compare this year to last year, we see schools that are having the highest and lowest impact on student outcomes. Our system, one of the things that we try to do is we take work by folks in this room, like I see McCall Kurlander and Sherry Reed in the back, and I hear Evan talking about the work they're trying, Evan and my other colleagues on the panel talking about the work they're trying to do in the research community, and we try to operationalize that. We turn that into metrics that show up at the right time when you're trying to make decisions. So we have a series of ways that we help people look at their data and understand and unpack it. And we take concepts like which schools are doing the best job at preparing kids for college, and we try to make that available to you as a school at a time where you can actually make a decision for how to utilize the information. I want to highlight, because part of the goal here is to talk about cross-sectoral data, like how do we look at kids transitioning from K-12 to higher ed. And so I thought it'd be useful today to highlight one of our initiatives that's focused on trying to do exactly that. For years at core districts, one of the indicators that we provided to middle schools, and this was because middle schools said to us, we'd love to have something that looks at how well we're preparing kids for high school. High schools have graduation. What do I know as an eighth grade that tells me that we're doing a good job? So we had developed this indicator called high school readiness, and it looks at the percentage of kids that are on track to and very highly likely to graduate from high school. And we use a variety of factors for that: attendance, GPA, et cetera. And in our collaborative, one of the requests has been, well, can we do a readiness look that's grades 3 to 12? Can we let us know, like, where are kids in terms of their preparation in those grade levels? And in particular, typically a lot of the on-track work focuses on kind of mechanistic elements of on-track, like, do I have enough credits to graduate? Am I meeting the A to G requirements? All that's really important, but it might be that I've met those criteria, but even though I've done that, maybe I'm not actually ready for college. And so what we're doing is we're doing the similar work to what's happening in Long Beach. In fact, using a lot of Long Beach data to do it. We are looking at what does early success look like in college, and how do we backtrack from that in the K-12 experience to tell us that kids are likely to be successful? And we'll look at traditional things like course taking and assessments, but then we'll also be looking at things like our social emotional measures. And I just thought, it's a data session, so let's share some findings, right? So always good to have I get the only finding that's kind of fun. So one of the questions we have is, what is early success in college? And what we find by looking at National Student Clearinghouse data is that if a student goes to a 4-year school right out of high school, and they persist into their second year, about 3 out of 4 of those students will graduate in 6 years. So it's a pretty good indicator if you see a student goes off to higher ed, goes into a 4-year school, makes it to their second year, pretty good indicator that they will persist. Although we have this technical advisory group, McCall's on it, and she's like, you got to look at UC versus CSU. We're doing that. We're going to find out how different this is. But this is like a decent general finding for us to sort of say, like, okay, 2 years persisting, probably a good indicator that kids are going to be reasonably successful in higher ed. Community college, not so much, right? So students will go to community college, they persist for 2 years. Only 22% of those kids actually had some kind of meaningfully good results, meaning they either finished their community college or they actually graduated from college. So we went into our analytics, and we found something kind of interesting because we do have some community college data. And we found that there is something that you can see right away when kids go to community college that gives you a pretty good signal, we think. We're going to do some more investigating on this, that they are going to graduate. And that is basically this idea of what we're calling quality credits. I'm sure we didn't make this up. But basically, you take a student's GPA and you multiply it by their credits. Like if I had an average of Bs and I had 10 credits, I earned 30 quality credits. And that gives you a pretty good signal about whether or not they're actually going to graduate and do something meaningful. Up and down here is the probability of some good outcome. And what you see is as quality credits go up, that good outcome probability goes up too. If I had up the GPA, you would see that GPA is not that predictive. Nowhere near as predictive as this quality credits concept. I'll highlight a couple of last things before I wrap up, and then we get to do Q&A. We believe strongly in the idea of research, and so we partner with PACE, and we have our Core PACE Research Partnership, and that's part of that's part of the purpose behind our Core Data Collaborative. And the last note I'm going to leave you with is on this theme of California need not do this work of data alone. We have joined the EdFi Alliance, which is an alliance sponsored by the Dell Foundation. Entire states have gone EdFi, so to speak, for their state longitudinal data systems. Arizona has done this, Delaware, a few other places. It reduces costs, and the big idea is this. I think some of you might remember when there were fires 20, 30 years ago in Oakland, people showed up with their fire hoses from different places and found they couldn't plug in the hoses to the hydrants. Well, we have the same problem in education. That they are not interoperable ways for data to come from different sources into a data warehouse. And so the solution to that has been for-profit companies creating their own ways, proprietary ways to do that, kind of expensive. Well, Dell said this is silly. Let's invest in open source ways to do this. And that's precisely what EdFi is offering. And so we are a big proponent of the EdFi approach. We have a proof of concept that we're doing around this year with one of our districts, and then we intend to expand it. And it will enable us to get into that regular data in a way that we think will be lower cost, more interoperable, and we think could pave the way for great stuff in California.
Nailed it.
All right, and I'm done. All right.
Great. Thank you for sticking to the time allocations here. So we would like to open up for 15, 20 minutes of Q&A, conversation between you all and the panelists. So why don't we experiment with, in this size room, if you say your question really loudly and you all repeat and say who you are and where you work, and say who your question's for, and then you all repeat back the question so it can be recorded. If that doesn't work, I'll be running around with this. So we'll see how this works. I'd like to open it up. Who would like to ask a question? Yes.
I'm going to get you speak a little bit. We'll see. My name is Shiloh Westfield. I work for the California Department of Education. I'm the data administrator for special education. If you don't know what that is, I'm in charge of a thing called CaseNess. So we're moving IEP data into CalPads, and one of the things that we found is that there lacks both interoperability and data governance around the time the data is created, not when it's used. You all spoke a lot improve their data quality by improving data governance, data definitions, data understanding. So I'd really love to understand how you think we can improve data quality in this manner, or how you would see, or how you've addressed it in your own work.
Evan or Noah?
I don't work with individual districts.
Okay, so the question was about essentially starting to look at special ed data and realizing that in the CalPAD system that districts actually have different timing, I believe, around when data gets submitted and cleaned and all that kind of good stuff, and how do we improve data governance and data quality. I think Marcy made a great point in her presentation about this, which is dashboarding and analytics create a forcing function for people to clean up their data. So use creates the reason to clean it up. So that's my quick response on this. I think Marcy actually might be able to extend more on this particular one.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. I total agreement with that. We often talk about the student information systems as data jail, because people are entering data into it all the time, but they never get to see it. And so when you start dashboarding it back, it's like, oh my goodness, we have been coding attendance incorrectly. And that data is part of our funding. So there's a great incentive to clean it up. And I think between the work that we do, which is the immediate dashboarding of what's in those SISs daily, and CalPADs, there's a great kind of convergence of the need to make sure that we have that data conformed so that we've got some agreement about who's in what population of kids. So, I will just end it on that. So.
And can I add, I think this gets also another theme that there's this desire to get more frequent and the timing right and things like that. I actually think, take CalPADs, for instance. Even though folks don't have to have it up to date all the time, the fact that it's there and that things need to be certified by a particular date has been amazing for education data. I guess don't underestimate the value of even annually clean data. You can do so much with it. And I think, there's just value in every step.
And I think too, having that annual certification process is really important. But when you start looking at the California dashboards and differentiated assistance for districts, we really want to have that data current as of today, because those, we've already identified what populations of kids we haven't been serving to the best of our abilities, and how do we make sure that we know exactly who those kids are. So it just becomes very important for us to really be monitoring that data on a daily basis.
I'm going to run down.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hensley. I'm the Center for K-12 Education at RTI International, which is a research institute that has not much to do with response to intervention. It's complicated. So, kind of a two-part question. So, because we are a bit behind the curve on timing in California, I think it presents both a challenge and an opportunity. An opportunity to, build on lessons learned from mistakes others have made. But the challenge is that in the absence of this true P220 system over the years, we have developed, systems to fill in the gaps. I kind of want to know from the group of you what you most dread when it comes to decisions about governance and where control over the system could live. And then what would be sort of most ideal for that?
So, I guess I'm not going to comment on where the system should live. That's an interesting debate. But what I most dread, I think, is in some other states, there's been a lot of a multi-year process that's gone into building a system that sits idle for various reasons. And I think that among those reasons are that each sort of use or project or purpose requires sign-off from a long list of data contributors. And I think we need to figure out a way so that that doesn't happen. And to there be a clear guidance as to what the system, the purposes to which the system should be put, but when it comes to individual projects, that there's a rather sort of streamlined process where there's really a presumption on doing a project as opposed to the opposite. The second thing that I would say I dread is the California, not just California, but the procurement process that has created in many other states and in California and other contexts a data system that becomes its own monster, its own jail, as Marcy puts it. We need to learn some lessons from the folks in Silicon Valley about how to do technology better. This is something that I think the Newsom administration will focus on. But we should be thinking in terms of APIs here as opposed to in terms of creating a new and proprietary data system that doesn't speak well with other systems. Because to the first question's point, we need to be thinking in terms of data standards. We need to be thinking that there's a number of different systems that might feed into this, and they might come in different formats, and we need to be thinking something that is building something that's extensible, that can take data from a number of different types of formats and link them together. So those are my two thoughts on that.
Perhaps I can talk a little bit about why we decided not to use CalPass and develop our own data warehouse. When we first looked at CalPass and looked at the Fresno data warehouse using CalPass, it was very K-12 centric. They really didn't talk about higher ed data. So because of that reason, we decided to develop our own database that can help us to come up with a predictive model of what worked and what did not, and how we can inform K-12 as well as community college instructors as well as institutions. So I think what's important is exactly what it is that you want to do with your data. It's not so much of which governance structure makes sense, but it should be dictated by what we want to do, and that should dictate where it should reside and what the governance structure should look like.
I think one of my worries is, and I don't quite know how to exactly describe this, but I think a great scenario would be something like this. What's going to happen is all this wonderful data is going to be in one place, and it's going to be cleaned and organized in a way that many amazing things can be done with it. And only potentially like a centralized authority has the ability to do stuff with it without some kind of a proposal process and what have you. But I think, again, making it back to the Silicon Valley reference, if a lot's already happening in California with the data because the market has been unleashed and people want things. And I think if there's a way that the system can sort of take advantage of the power of that market, for example, with CORE, we basically use a lot of CalPads extracts and things like that. How do we get it? The districts extract it from the ODS and send it to us. You can imagine a scenario where instead if an LEA says, hey, I'm in CORE and I actually want CORE to have all of this data, that the district could go in and say that, and then the data could come to us through an API. That sounds like very, for those of you who don't do technical stuff, maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal, but that would be a huge deal because it would make everything so much easier and faster. And then if we're doing something that people see as valuable, then they can spend money on that, but not spend the money on all the data extracting and all those other things that could potentially be taken care of by a system. And that would require kind of flexible governance that takes a lot of creative thinking.
And I would just have one thing to add. One of the things that we found to be so central to the work that we've been doing is this whole idea of local control, and having data in the hands of teachers and administrators or caseworkers that are frontline with improving outcomes for kids is really important in my experience. And I would really advocate for data governance that really supports that local control.
I'm going to add one more, if I can, issue. I think I worked in Texas for the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board in the 90s, when it was experimenting with using a host of different kinds of data. And there was some harm done to students. And so when the stakes get high, there are ways to limit access and to move students around. And so I want to reinforce the do no harm around the equity imperative here as a huge issue to watch when we talk about the governance and the mechanisms we're putting into place and why we're doing this. Another question. I'm going to awkwardly run back through the middle. I saw a hand back here. Great.
Martha Zaragoza Diaz and I represent Californians Together in the California Association for Bilingual Education. And my question is around cost. How much does this coordinated system cost? And how is it shared among the various entities that are part of the system? And how do you, a lot of your projects are funded through grants. Once those grants disappear, how are your initiatives going to be sustained at the local level? That's my question. Service pieces.
I hope this isn't a cop-out, but the cost is very dependent on what you're building. I think 10 million is a great starting number. I'd love to see something bigger, but it really depends on what kind of data system you're building. You know, questions around how fast it's going to refresh are going to change the cost pretty dramatically. How much of a front end, like what the user interactions, how much of sort of a dashboard type functions it would have for various users around the state is going to change cost dramatically. So there are lower cost ways of building this and higher cost ways of building this, and there's no one right answer there. The second part of the question was about sustainability. Yeah. So it's a great question. You know, when we build roads in California, we don't wonder how the different users of those roads are going to end up paying for them. It's infrastructure. It should be paid for by the state on an ongoing basis. It's an investment by the state. It will reap tremendous rewards for the state. And that's who should be paying for it over time. So those are my opinions.
I'll add to, Simon, did you want to?
Go ahead.
Colleen Moore, a wonderful researcher at Insights, did a series on data-related issues, and she did ask people in other states, how much did you spend on your state-level data systems? And it's hard because they didn't start in this, we give you this much money. It evolved more in most of the states. But they did think for a traditional, high-level, not constantly refreshed statewide data system, about $2 million to keep it going seemed like a reasonable estimation, depending on your purpose, depending on the amount of data, and a whole host of factors. They thought that was a ballpark. Or bigger, who knows, but that's what we got from interviews.
The sustainability question is a good one because there are so many databases that are built yet not maintained. So yes, our database that we're building is grant funded, but one guideline that I gave to our technical team was that once it's developed, we want to make sure that it can be automatically automated in a way that it can be maintained. So I'm not sure whether it's going to happen or not, but nonetheless, I think that's an important aspect that we need to keep in mind.
I would just echo what Evan was saying. I think so much of this is really about infrastructure. And you have to have the infrastructure in place to be able to do this work. And so in lieu of having funding streams that were directed toward doing this work from the state or the feds, you know, we took on building it ourselves at the county office. And there is such interest in the work that our Board of Supervisors and our county government agencies are looking at how to incorporate this as part of their budgets. Again, it comes back to the infrastructure piece. And I think that as we start to realize the power that these coordinated efforts could yield for the state in improving outcomes for kids, that I really do think that it becomes a larger question of the funding coming from the state or the federal governments, and the ways in which we pay for the infrastructure that will benefit all of our communities.
Yeah, coming up from our end, just to share, it's similar thinking. I think we think of the foundation resources as really investment in the initial infrastructure, investment in sort of like the R&D kind of stuff. The ongoing revenues have to be government dollars. So in our case, that is our members paying fees. We think and they think, I hope, fairly modest fees. In the state's case, I think it has to, again, be just a line item piece. And I'll tell you, like to Evan, to your first point, I mean, when I hear $10 million and I think, hey, there's already these existing data extracts out there in the world, if you give me 10 million, I mean, the things we could do, the tricky part becomes, when all of you start to email, what's the gentleman's name? Ben, and we want to do everything, and then all of a sudden it goes away real fast. So I mean, I love the piece actually that was handed out by Colleen Moore about like, hey, let's walk before you run. Let's pick some simple things and get some wins. And with $10 million, you can do that. Like, you could do some amazing stuff.
Let's do one more.
Hi. So, Noah, this is a question for you, and maybe Marcy. But, Noah, when I looked at your slides and you talked about what you were able to do looking at 3rd grade through 12th grade, what I really felt was the absence of earlier data. Because we know that what happens in kids in those first years of school is so foundational. And my question is, what would it take for us to not start in 3rd grade, but move much earlier? Can we learn from innovations that are happening at the local level? And then I have a two-parter, if you have time. You guys have done so much about figuring out how do you make sure that data doesn't just sit in a dashboard, but people use it. And as we move forward, I wondered whether you had your top tips for making sure that data doesn't just sit in a dashboard, but it actually gets used for action. So the first one was taking it lower, and the second one is action.
Yeah, I'll take your second one first. I was struck this morning and thinking a lot about, and I've thought a lot about this lately, is, we've got all these different initiatives about school improvement that are coming. I think you actually did a great job this morning sort of saying a school is a thing. It's not like, it's not a CSI school one day and a differentiated assistance school another day. And, it's like one thing. And I think the most important thing that we can build in our schools, in our districts, is improvement capacity. So like what we find when we go out and we do improvement work is if we show up in a school and they already have systems and structures in place to do improvement, like time in the day, teams that meet regularly, then we can do a lot to build their ability to address just about any problem and to utilize data. I think what happens is when you show up at a place where none of those structures and systems are in place, the first thing you need is that. So whatever the identification issue, that building capacity to actually look at and use data, literally systems, time, structures, all that stuff, I think is super important. And now I forgot your first question.
About starting earlier.
Earlier, yeah. So here's the tricky, so we are all about like how do we operationalize stuff at scale? And at scale, we have very limited information about kids in the early grades. We know attendance, and that's about it. So that's the tricky part. So what we need is better information at scale in the earlier grades. So attendance is useful, great signal, kids coming to school or not, but we need more information. I loved it when we tested kids in 2nd grade. I know I'm not popular for that probably in this room, but like, assessments, like they're key. So, and we're looking in, and I think you guys are already starting this, like, this is actually, EdFi is a great point here. Many systems use proprietary assessments in earlier grades, whether that's the Fontes Pinnell or any of the other ones. We need all of those vendors to set up EdFi APIs so that we can bring those data into our EdFi systems. So if we can all get on the same page, we're all going to use this interoperable way, then we can start to bring that data in at scale and do real stuff with it. So it doesn't sound sexy, data interoperability, but it's like the key to victory here. So, all right.
Yeah, so we have really been tackling, I call it the Wild West of early learning. Nobody's on the same systems. They don't have any standards in common. So we've been working to create those standards. We have loaders built for the DRDP. We have built loaders for early health screening information. It was so exciting. We did a presentation at CIRA back in November, and I was working with one of our key pilot districts, Franklin McKinley Unified, and we had merged all of that data and we've had it going back for 2 years now. We had a class of kindergartners, and we had DRDP and health screening data for those kindergartners as they were coming into the kinder system, kinder years. And, just saw kids that had flatlined on the DRDP for 2 years in a row. We pulled up their health screening information. The kiddo that we landed on had not passed the hearing screening, and he'd flatlined on his language development. And it was like the first flag for a kinder teacher to say, well, we need to look more closely at this child. So when we talk about intervening early, we have tremendous power to do that if we can link those early indicators of readiness. We also know that many of our Head Start students are coming into K-12 prepared for that experience, but we lose them. By the time they get to 3rd grade, our learning environments are so different in K-12 than they are in those early education systems that kids have a really hard time translating. And so their academic indicators, show that we question whether Head Start really did the good job of preparing them, and it really is a whole other conversation that may need to take place. Beginning to connect the dots and get those systems online. We have districts who are using what we think could be a really good early learning student information system called iPinwheel. We have districts entering data in there. We have the API set up, and we've already identified the data, and we're starting to bring it over now into the data zone. So that's the early learning part of the question, and now I forgot the second part, which getting people to use it. Oh yeah, and we do totally, build that in. When we start the data zone conversations with the district, I say there are 2 mountains you're going to climb, and the first is getting all the data in one place, and you're going to spend some time getting your data organized, getting it cleaned. And the second is, what are you going to do with that data when you get it? And so we start conversations about building out. What are the common meeting times? How does the system work so that we can insert that data conversation wherever we can? And I think that's really the key to making it useful. And I think we've got some great conversations going on throughout the rest of the day about how you implement at scale. And I think that's equally as important as getting all the data together in one place.
All right, it's so hard to cut off questions when it's this rich, but what we'd like to do is give you a little bit of time to talk amongst yourselves. And so the question this group, we all came up with that you could talk about, you could pick your own at your table, is what are your thoughts about the purposes of a statewide data system? A lot of issues have come up that you can connect with over that. And I'd like to ask the panelists to circulate and have your chance to talk with tables about these issues. And then you can have lunch after that. All right, everyone. Can we take 2 minutes to close us out? Let's wrap up. Thank you. My glass is plastic, so clinging it is useless. All right. I'm just going to take 2 minutes that we have to ask a couple of people up in the front to just share who you are and what your table talked about.
Okay, I'm Jennifer O'Day from the American Institutes for Research. And one of the questions that we talked about was really getting to the use case and the users and purposes of the data. And here we're talking about a state data system. And the question is, what data need to be collected and organized at the state level, and what really are more appropriately organized and collected at the local level or regional, it could be that. But I think we need to think about that, because oftentimes we talk about a state data system as though everything should go into that.
Thank you for that. And let me move over to Alicia.
Right. Alicia Smith-Arriaga, Education Trust West. And we talked a little bit about, in terms of purpose of the data system, how to think about perverse incentives and what are use cases of when those have been created, and then how that was worked around, and how important it is to think about that in the beginning, especially if results from a data system are going to be used to allocate resources.
Well, I want to thank you all. We are at time, and it is lunchtime. It sounds like the governor's office is very open to hearing from you all, and there are a lot of great ideas on the table. And I think if we can, a few of us will probably stick around for a couple minutes to talk, but we thank you so much for your engagement in this conversation. Thanks.